And God did the impossible before.
Huh?
And God did the impossible for him before.
And God had done the impossible for him before. That's the other thing. God had already brought life out of death. Sarah said as much. My womb is dead. My husband can't have children. It's a miracle. Only God can do this. So he can take a dead womb and put life in it. So he's heard God, and he's already seen what God can do. So, hey, if this is what you want, okay, fine.
So why was he okay fine with this, but he wasn't okay fine with, like, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah?
Right,
because
exactly.
he pleaded for Sodom and Gomorrah.
Exactly, yeah, that's one of the...
And he had heard God, he
right.
did know it was God, and he didn't say, okay, fine.
Right, I know, and that question right there, that's a great question, because the sages also raise the same question. They say, how come it is that Abraham, for Sodom and Gomorrah, he goes out and says, what if there's 50 righteous, 45, 40, 10? And God says, okay, there's 10 righteous. He doesn't negotiate with God here. He doesn't even stop and go, hey God, you really sure about this whole burnt offering thing? Can't we just go up there and offer something else? And can we negotiate this? This is try that here. And you're right that this is one of those conundrums where you're going, how come he doesn't just stop and go? Maybe it's because A, he's heard the voice of God before, and that's just brought to history. And also complement that with what Jen said, where he says, you know what? And here's what Hebrews says. Abraham reasoned that if God made a covenant promise, and that covenant promise had to come through Isaac, if God is going to take Isaac, he's going to have to raise him up again. And the faith to believe that comes from the fact that if he brought life out of a dead womb, he can raise up an already existing life that goes dead. This is what the book of Hebrews says. Now, the proof of that is what Henry was saying, where he says to his servants, we will go up, we will worship, and we will return. Okay. Hold on. Question over here.
I was just saying, also, if I had just seen what God did to Sodom and Gomorrah, I wouldn't be questioning,
Yeah, maybe that's the answer. Is I've seen what God did with Sodom and Gomorrah, which was I negotiated him down to 10, and there wasn't 10 there, so the whole place got nuked. Maybe this whole negotiation thing, maybe that's not the way to go. I don't know. That's just one of those. It didn't go. I got it down to 10, and I couldn't even find 10. So maybe this whole idea of trying to bargain with God is not the direction to go. Yes.
And that's a good point also. But also thinking when Abraham was negotiating, he was talking about other people, not himself. With other cases, he was talking about himself, and he was okay with whatever God wanted to do with him.
Yeah, but why? If you negotiate for others, why would you negotiate for your family? And I would be more inclined for my family and say, forget everybody else. That's me. But okay.
Yeah.
Paul said that Abraham was the father of faith, and so if he's remembering God reminding him over and over and over again, your seed's going to be like the sand. It's going to be through Isaac, and God tells him that many, many, many times. And he tries. Then Sarah goes, well, here is my servant Hagar,
Right.
God says, no, it's not going to come through him.
Right.
It's going to come through Isaac. So he's thinking this in the back of his head, and I think that since he did say God will provide a sacrifice, I really feel that he just my opinion, that he knew that it wasn't going to be Isaac. It was going to be something else.
Well, it's interesting, though, because let's go to the book of Hebrews. This is so we're looking at, and I'm coming back here, hold on. Hebrews chapter 11. It's interesting how it reads here. Go to verse 8. Let's read here. It says, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith he dwelt in the land of promise, as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. By faith Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born as many as the stars of the sky in multitude, innumerable as the sand which is on the seashore. That sounds familiar, right? Used all the way through. Now look at verse 17. I'm skipping down. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, and by the way, it says that the Lord tested Abraham in Genesis 22. But Abraham doesn't know it's a test. It's great if God would have said, hey, Abraham, this is just a test. Well, let me suggest that God doesn't come to us and tell us he's testing us. He just tests us. And by the way, he doesn't tempt us, he tests us. Testing is for a demonstration of faith. Temptation is so that you will fall. That's different. It says, verse 17, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises offered him up as his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, even from the dead, from which he also received it in a figurative sense. In other words, in the mind of God, Abraham did offer him up. When he agreed to do it, when he set out to do it, it was as if it was already a done deal. It's like, hey, Abraham already agreed to do this. Once he already made the decision that this was the way it was going to be, God accredited it to him for righteousness. Even though he didn't have to go through with it. It was just because God said, you know what? Abraham did agree to do it. This is the legacy of Abraham. Now, I want you to skip over last verse here. Go over to chapter 26 of Genesis. Genesis chapter 26. Look at the legacy of Abraham. It says this. By the way, the beauty of the scriptures is this. It shows us these patriarchs with all of their foibles and their faults, but also on the trajectory of faith. But it's not meteoric. It's not like this. It's more like this. There's peaks and valleys. There's peaks and valleys. It's not as if everything was just upward like this. Look what happens in verse 2. Then the Lord appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt. He's talking to Isaac here. Verse 3, dwell in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your descendants I give all these lands. And I will perform the oath which I swore to Abraham your father. And I will make your descendants multiply as the stars of heaven. I will give to your descendants all these lands, and in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. He was an obedient man. You had a question. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, it was a comment when you were saying how come he negotiated for Lot but not for Isaac.
Yeah.
There are times when I instruct my daughters to do something and they know they can negotiate with me, and there are times when they know they can't.
Good point.
Simply by tone of voice.
That's a great point.
Things like that.
That's a great point.
It doesn't have to be said,
Yeah.
hey, this is negotiable, or no, this isn't.
There are times with tone, when parents speaking to their children, there are times when the child knows that there's negotiation, and there's times when the child knows there is no negotiation. They can tell by the way you said it. They pick up on the tone. If you're kind of like, well, I don't really want you to do it, you know. They're like, oh, well, there's negotiation there. Because you're not really sold on it. But if you say, absolutely, positively not going to happen. And they go, okay.
It told us back in the negotiation point, that's when God was even saying to himself, should I tell him?
Right. But that's the part of should I tell him. But I think you're right on this part. I think God tells him so that he will negotiate.
And so maybe his tone was such.
Yes, I think it was. We have another person that negotiates. Well, actually, let's go to a person that doesn't negotiate. Before this, maybe this was also one of those. God comes to Noah and says, I'm going to destroy it. And Noah doesn't go, hey, let's talk this over. I mean, it seems a little rash. You sure, everybody? He says, no. But he teaches for 120 years. Okay, so it's not as if God is impatient or doesn't have mercy. For 120 years, Noah preaches and teaches and nobody repents. So it's not as if God wasn't merciful. Let's fast forward. Let's fast forward Exodus chapter 32, golden calf. God says, Moses, get out of my way. I'm going to destroy the whole bunch of them. I'm nuking the whole bunch. I think the tone there is, Moses, talk to me. Talk to me. Moses says, God, you can't nuke the whole bunch. Do you realize what this will do? This is problematic on so many levels. First of all, you made a promise to Abraham's descendants. You can't go back on your promise. Not only that, but this will really ruin your reputation with the Egyptians. All the neighbors are going to talk and say, what kind of God was this who brought them out to destroy them? Right? So this is really problematic, God. You really can't do this. I suggest the tone that God has with Moses is, hey Moses, talk to me. I want to bring you out. I want you to wrestle with me. I want you to, and by the way, it's this kind of wrestling that demonstrates that Moses is the kind of leader he's supposed to be. That he goes before God for the people to intercede for them and say, hey, give them mercy. Give them mercy. All right. Any other questions or comments? Big section, huge section, but yeah.
Well, Moses was faithful and he trusted God because it was 24 years before Sarah had the baby.
Talk about Abraham.
Excuse me, Abraham.
Right. Yeah.
It was 24 years, so that was a lot of patience.
Yes.
On both of them.
Yes. Although at points and times of this, like all of us, in fairness to them, we're like this as well. We all come to this place sometimes where we want to help God out. And Hagar was trying to help God out, and then Abraham says in chapter, I think it's 16, how about if he says to God, hey God, how about if I adopt Eliezer and that be the firstborn? And God says, no, that's not what the thought was here either. This is from your own body. But he's got to get Abraham and Sarah to the point that they can't have children in the natural. That the only way that they can have children is in the supernatural. Then God moves in and says, okay. And he's teaching Abraham this lesson again about life from death. So that when we get to chapter 22, hey, if I offer him up, God will bring him back. You know what he's got to do? He's got to resurrect him. Abraham has this resurrection faith. God kills him. He made a promise. And he's got to bring him back to life. But I've already seen him bring life out of death before. He can do that.
And the other point is that he was, at first, he was going to be a father of many people. But later on, he's the father of nations. Nations.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's fascinating what's going on here. And I think this whole picture, we didn't have time to really go into this at all. This whole picture of Isaac and Jacob, of Abraham and Isaac, is a picture of Yeshua and his father. I mean, it's just this fascinating picture. When you look at the narrative and you say, okay, hold on, a father who loves his son, who sacrifices his son, they go 3 days journey. This father loves his son. Mount Moriah. I mean, you look at this whole thing, this macrocosm picture of Yeshua the Messiah and his father. And it's just, you can just walk through this whole narrative, and I printed it out for you in the handout, but there's just places all over the place where you're just kind of going, this is the big scheme, this is the picture. And God will raise him up. He's going to raise his son up. He'll receive him as if dead and raise him up. It's like all the way through this thing, it's a work in progress, literary progress thing here going on, according to Yeshua and his father. It's
he
like
will provide for himself.
Yeah.
Yeshua is the Lamb of God.
Yeah, it's a ram. I mean, it's just all the way through this thing. You see the pictures coming through if you're watching it and looking forward. So it's amazing stuff.
Abraham is our father.
Yeah, Abraham is our father. Yeah. So, all right.
Look at Isaac's faith. He passed on quite a faith.
Yes, he did.
For him to go along too.
Absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely.
He was giving up more than his son. He's giving up his life.